My knees nearly buckled when I stepped onto the porch that afternoon. The rain had soaked right through my work pants, and I was shivering, though I'm not sure if it was the cold or something inside me. I'd come home early, just wanted a hot shower and to change into dry clothes. That was all. I'd been on the road since 5 in the morning, hauling equipment back and forth at the site. My back ached. My boots were caked with mud. And in my head, I was already thinking about how good it would feel to take them off and just breathe. I'm 52. Been working construction for most of my adult life. That day, it felt like all I had left was my job and a routine. But back then, I still thought I had more. A wife. 3 kids. A neighbor I used to shoot the breeze with. We'd known each other for years. Our families had barbecues together, or played dominoes on Friday nights. Nothing special, nothing fancy. Just regular folks living regular lives. I never really wondered if anything could go wrong. Sometimes you catch a weird feeling in your gut, but you brush it off. Life is too busy for doubts. Mortgage, kids' homework, groceries, car repairs, everything just folds into one big mix, and you keep going until your head hits the pillow at night. I climbed the steps, holding the railing because the wood was slick with rain. Usually the dog, an old mutt we picked up at a shelter, would be at the door, scratching to greet me. But I didn't hear him. I thought maybe he was in the backyard or napping. Sometimes he hides under the table when it storms. Thunder spooks him. Anyway, I didn't think much of it. The quiet felt nice at first. Nobody yelling for dinner. Nobody blasting the TV. Just the hush of an empty house, which was rare but welcome. I pushed open the front door, dripped water across the living room floor. I could see a faint glow on the far side, maybe the lamp was on in the kitchen. I called out once, "Anybody home?" but got silence. My jacket was soaked, so I peeled it off and dropped it on the old armchair we'd had for a decade. The fabric was stained from all sorts of spills, coffee, juice, who knows what else. My wife had threatened to toss that chair out 100 times. But I liked it. It had been around longer than 2 of our kids. I moved toward the stairs with that single thought: get out of these wet clothes, maybe run the shower until it steamed up the bathroom. Sometimes, after a long day, that's the best comfort. Warm water, a moment alone, no questions. I remember hearing the distant tick of the clock in the hallway. Everything felt slow. The house was dim, the rain tapping on the windows. If I'd known what was about to happen, maybe I would have walked out. Maybe I'd have turned around and never gone up those steps. But life doesn't give us warnings like that. I reached the top landing, noticed the bedroom door was slightly open. Not enough to see inside, but enough that I wondered if my wife was napping. She sometimes did that on stormy afternoons, especially when the kids were out. Our oldest had a part-time job by then. The middle one was often at a friend's place. The youngest had after-school activities. So, it wasn't unusual for her to have the house to herself. Maybe I thought she had a headache or something. I didn't want to startle her, so I slowed my steps. I wiped my face with my sleeve. I smelled damp fabric and old sweat. My heartbeat felt off, though I couldn't say why. Before I stepped inside, I heard a faint sound. Like a low moan, but it was muffled. I froze. My mind tried to make sense of it. At first I thought she might be hurt. A slip in the shower, or maybe she was crying. My wife wasn't one to cry often, but it wouldn't be the first time she broke down over some frustration. I took one more step, and the door squeaked under my hand. That's when I saw them. She was on her hands and knees, her back arched. And behind her was Johnny, our neighbor. The guy I'd had beers with, the guy I'd invited over countless times. He was the last person I would have expected to see in my bedroom, especially like that. His shirt was half off, his jeans around his ankles. Her hair was twisted in his hand, her face turned toward the side. They didn't see me. Not right away. I'm not sure what happened inside my head in that exact moment. Everything slowed. My breathing stopped, I think. I just stood there, half inside the doorway, half in the hallway, watching like it was a scene on TV. Something about the dim light, the smell of sweat, the sheets bunched up at the foot of the bed. It all looked cheap, dirty. My wife was panting, and Johnny was grunting. I felt my mouth go dry. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Time passed. Maybe it was seconds, maybe minutes. At some point, she turned her head. Our eyes met. I saw her face change, like she'd been slapped. Johnny jerked back and almost fell sideways. She scrambled off the bed. He tried to pull his jeans up, cursing under his breath. But I just stood there. Didn't yell. Didn't rush him. Didn't ask how or why. My fists stayed at my sides, and my mind was blank, except for one thought: everything is done. Everything is broken. She said something like my name, or maybe she was just gasping. I didn't catch the words. I remember Johnny looking at me with panic in his eyes. We'd known each other for years, and now here he was, half naked in my bedroom. He tried to say something. I think it was an apology, or maybe he was just talking nonsense. I never moved. That was what scared me. I just watched them gather themselves, watched her pull the sheet over her, watched him fumble for his belt. My heart was pounding, but on the outside, I must have looked like a statue. Eventually, she lifted the sheet around herself and said my name again, quieter this time. There was no rush of excuses or tears like I would have imagined. I'd read stories about affairs, seen movies where people shout and throw lamps. But there was nothing. We were three people caught in a bad scene, and I guess the shock was too big to let any of us move. I'm not sure how long that silence went on. Maybe half a minute. Then I took a step back. Another. I turned around, walked down the hallway, down the stairs. Didn't say a word. My boots left muddy footprints all across the living room floor. I remember looking at them, thinking I should clean it up. Weird how your brain jumps to something like that. But I didn't stop. I went straight to the garage, flipped on the light, and stared at my tools. A drill, a saw, a couple of rusty wrenches. And then, on the far side, that old sledgehammer. The one I used when I redid the patio. Big, solid, with a wooden handle that had a chip near the grip. I picked it up and felt its weight. My arm muscles tensed, but my mind was calm. Too calm, maybe. I walked out into the rain, around to the driveway next door. Johnny's '68 Mustang was parked there. He'd been working on it for years. Always bragged about how he'd restored the engine, how the paint job was just like the original. He loved that car. My breath was steady as I raised the sledgehammer and brought it down on the hood. The crash echoed, metal bending under the blow. Rain pelted my face, but I barely noticed. I swung again, until the headlights shattered, the windows cracked, the hood caved in. I wasn't thinking, "This will solve something." I was only picturing his face when he saw it. Like I wanted him to feel a fraction of the shock I'd just felt. I don't know how many times I swung. I just know that eventually my arms felt like lead, and the Mustang was destroyed, panels ripped, glass everywhere, tires flattened. The thing looked like it had been through a demolition derby. I stood there, panting, rain dripping down my forehead, sledgehammer hanging at my side. My muscles shook. But inside, there was a strange calm. Like I'd done what I needed to, and now there was nothing left. Then I walked back to my house, water running off my hair into my eyes. I left the sledgehammer on the porch steps, not caring if neighbors saw or if the cops showed up. I climbed the stairs again. They were still in the bedroom, probably too stunned to move or maybe getting dressed in a hurry. I pushed the door open. Johnny was gone, or maybe he was hiding. She sat on the bed, the sheet clutched to her chest. Her eyes were wide, and she was shaking, but still no tears. No apology. I stood there a moment, catching my breath. Then I said, "You'll leave tomorrow. I'm not throwing you out tonight, but you're gone. I'm not gonna touch the kids. But you get out. I don't care where you go." My voice was low, almost calm, though my chest still pounded. She didn't argue. Didn't cry or beg. She just nodded, eyes on the floor. And in that silence, I knew we were already finished. Even the anger in me was starting to flicker out, replaced by something else, maybe numbness, maybe sorrow. I said one last thing before I turned and left the room. Disappear. It's over. She nodded again, like she'd already known that. Then I walked out. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the house felt darker than before. I sat in the living room for a long time after that. Couldn't bring myself to go back upstairs. Didn't know if Johnny was still up there or if he'd found his pants and run out the back door. I didn't really care. The sledgehammer was still on the porch steps. I could see it through the front window, rain glinting on the metal head. Maybe I expected the cops to roll up any minute, sirens and lights. But nothing happened. It was just me and the drip of water off my clothes. Eventually, I peeled off my wet shirt. It clung to my skin, heavy and cold. I tossed it on the floor and rubbed my face. Everything felt unreal. Minutes earlier, I'd walked in on my wife with another man. A man I knew, a neighbor, a friend, if you want to call him that. I kept replaying the sight in my head, her shoulders, his hands, the twisted sheets. Part of me wanted to run into the bedroom and yell, or maybe ask why. But I didn't see the point. The image was burned in my brain, and no apology would erase it. I got up and opened the fridge, though I wasn't really hungry. I just needed to do something. There was a leftover meatloaf on the top shelf, some takeout boxes, a bunch of beers in the door. I grabbed a beer, popped the cap with my thumb, and took a long drink. It tasted bitter, and I didn't enjoy it, but I drank it anyway. Then I took another. My mind started to drift to the kids. They weren't home. They didn't see what I saw. I wondered if they heard any rumors, if neighbors would talk. But it was too big a problem for me to handle right then. I just leaned against the counter, staring at the pattern on the linoleum. After a while, I heard the bedroom door open upstairs. Soft footsteps on the carpet. I tensed up, but I stayed where I was. She came downstairs wearing an old robe, face pale, hair messed up. She looked at me with big, hollow eyes. For a second, I thought she'd say something like, "I'm sorry," or, "It's not what it looked like." But she didn't. She just stood there, arms wrapped around herself. I felt something tighten in my chest. "You heard me," I said quietly. "Tomorrow. You're gone." She nodded, not meeting my eyes. I took another swig of beer, feeling it burn its way down my throat. "You can say it," I added. "Say something." She opened her mouth, but only a whisper came out. "I got nothing." And she walked away, disappearing into the hallway. I listened as her footsteps moved toward the kids' rooms. Maybe she was checking if they left anything behind that she needed to pack. I don't know. I stood there in the kitchen until I'd finished the beer. Then I dropped the empty bottle in the sink, where it clanked against dirty dishes. The dog finally crept out from somewhere. He looked at me with those anxious eyes and stayed a few feet away. I knelt down, put my hand on his head, and he whimpered. Maybe he sensed the tension. Dogs pick up on that stuff, I guess. But I didn't have any comfort to give him. Everything felt torn. I was trembling and cold, but it was like my insides had turned off. I was angry, but it felt distant. That night, I tried to sleep in the living room, but every time I closed my eyes I saw them. Even with the lights off, the image wouldn't leave. I ended up staring at the ceiling until dawn. She must have been in the bedroom or maybe on the couch in the den. I didn't care. The rain finally stopped around 3 in the morning. It left the world quiet and wet. I heard a few cars pass by outside, maybe some night shift workers heading home. At some point I thought about driving away, just leaving the house for good. But it was my place too, you know? And I wasn't ready to give up anything else. When morning came, I heard the kids trickle in. Our oldest had an early shift, so he was back by 8. The younger two got dropped off from wherever they'd spent the night. I could hear them upstairs, rummaging around, asking for Mom. I didn't move. Eventually, she took them aside, probably told them something. I heard muffled voices, some raised tones, but no full-blown yelling. Maybe she told them she had to go out of town, or that we'd had a fight. I didn't care what story she spun. My head pounded from lack of sleep. The living room was filled with morning light, and everything looked harsh, like it had been stripped bare. Late in the afternoon, I finally went upstairs. The bedroom smelled stale, and the sheets were still messed up. I felt sick looking at them, so I yanked them off the bed, balled them up, and shoved them into a trash bag. I still didn't yell or cry. I thought maybe I would, but my chest just felt numb. Then I realized I didn't even want to stay in that room anymore. So I took a blanket and a pillow and moved down to the den. Figured I'd sleep there until everything was sorted. Over the next few hours she packed. Not all of it, just enough for a suitcase or two. She didn't say goodbye to me, didn't kiss the kids or put on some dramatic show. She just carried her bags to her car. That night, the kids asked me where she was going. I told them to ask her themselves. I didn't have an explanation. My throat tightened whenever I tried to speak about it. So I didn't. I just shoved myself in the den, letting them figure it out. Around 10, I heard a car in the driveway. It must have been Johnny. There was some shuffling and low voices, then the car door slammed, and they pulled out. I guess she went to stay with him. Or maybe she just needed a ride. I didn't go to the window to check. That was the last night I spent in the same house with her. The kids were asleep or pretending to be. I know it hit them hard, but I couldn't comfort them. I sat on the edge of the old couch, picking at a loose thread on the cushion, my mind blank except for the memory of that sight, the two of them in my bedroom. I must have stared at the wall for hours. The next day, the phone rang a couple times. Probably relatives or neighbors who heard something. I ignored it. My boss sent me a text about missing work, asked if everything was okay. I typed back a short message. Family emergency. Be in tomorrow. Then I turned off my phone. I felt dull, heavy. The house was too quiet, and the kids tiptoed around like they were afraid to wake a sleeping bear. By the afternoon, I decided I needed air. I went out to the backyard, looked at the grass that needed mowing, the fence that could use a fresh coat of paint. For a second, it all felt so ordinary that I almost laughed. Like how could something so normal still matter when my entire life had just gone off a cliff? I stood there, thinking about what to do next, and my eyes drifted to Johnny's driveway, where the Mustang used to sit. Now it was a mangled wreck. He must have towed it or hidden it somewhere, but the oil stain on the asphalt remained. A dark blotch spreading across the pavement. Part of me felt satisfied. Another part just felt emptier. I remember going to the garage, staring at my tools again. Everything in neat rows, everything in its place. That was how I liked it. Predictable, reliable. A bolt doesn't suddenly decide it loves a different wrench. It just stays put. I grabbed a rag, wiped my hands for no reason, then put it down. There was a clock ticking somewhere, echoing in the still air. I couldn't stand the sound of it, so I left. By evening, the kids were hungry. The middle one said, "Dad, what's going on?" And the youngest wouldn't look me in the eye. I tried to cook something simple, hot dogs, macaroni, whatever. My hands were unsteady, but I managed. We ate in silence. I saw the worry in their faces. They had questions, but I didn't have answers. After we ate, they drifted off to their rooms. I stayed at the table, my plate untouched, staring at the steam rising from the food. My appetite was gone. I didn't sleep that night either. The house felt haunted by the memory of what I'd seen. Every creak of the floor reminded me of footsteps in that bedroom. Every so often, I'd catch a whiff of the sheets I'd thrown away. Or maybe I was imagining it. I couldn't get the smell of sweat and betrayal out of my head. I remember pressing my hands into my temples, trying to shut it out. But it stayed. And that was just the beginning of what was coming next. In the days after she left, I kept telling myself I'd handle things step by step. First, figure out the living situation for the kids. Second, let people know we were separated. Third, I don't know. Try to move on, I guess. But nothing went smoothly. My thoughts were tangled. The older boy asked me if we were divorcing. The middle one asked when Mom would be back. The youngest just withdrew, as if it were all too big for him. I didn't blame them. I could barely handle it myself. One evening, about a week after the day I found them, I got a call from her. The number was unfamiliar, but I recognized her voice. She was direct, almost cold. She said she wanted to talk about something. We arranged to meet in a parking lot near the highway, in front of a defunct diner that had closed last year. I got there first, sat in the truck tapping the wheel. She pulled up in some borrowed car. Might have been Johnny's, might have been a rental. She got out, didn't smile, and slipped into my passenger seat without a hello. I stared at her for a moment. She looked tired, shadows under her eyes. She inhaled like she was about to speak, then paused. Finally, she said, "We should do a test." I didn't catch her meaning at first. "A paternity test," she clarified. My stomach clenched. "Why?" I asked, but I knew. She was staring straight ahead, her voice low. "You deserve to know," she said. "I don't want secrets anymore. Not after all this." For a moment, I just sat there, stunned. My mind flipped through memories. The birth of our oldest, the way he had my nose, the way we taught him to ride a bike. Then the middle one, who had her eyes, and the youngest who was always so different, quieter. My throat went dry. "All of them?" I finally asked, voice shaky. She nodded. My vision tunneled. I felt a rush of anger, but also fear. "So you're telling me..." I couldn't finish the sentence. She pressed her lips together, tears glistening but not falling. "I'm telling you we need to know," she repeated. "I can't fix what I did, but I won't hide the truth." I almost laughed, like now she wanted to be honest, after everything. But I also felt this strange relief. Part of me had suspected for years that something was off. Late-night phone calls she tried to hide. Trips to see old friends. Now it was all coming to the surface, and I was too worn out to fight. We went for the tests the following week. Blood draws, cheek swabs, all that. She insisted we check each child. The kids were confused, but we explained it was just something to confirm some medical records. I hated lying, but I wasn't ready to drop the entire truth on them. Not yet. My wife, ex-wife, I guess, did her part, barely looking at me. I remembered the smell of antiseptic in the lab, the way the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I felt like I was standing on a plank over open water, forced to jump. They told us we'd get the results in a few days. That waiting period was torture. I'd lie awake, wondering if I'd been a fool for years. When you're there for every milestone, you don't question it. You're Dad, and that's all that matters. Now I was scared that might be a lie. My mind kept spinning. Did Johnny father one of them? Did her ex-boyfriend? She'd had a long-term ex before we got married, and he lived a few states away, but occasionally visited. A reunion with friends, she used to say. We'd had arguments about it. And each time, she told me I was just paranoid. Work was barely manageable. My coworkers noticed I was out of it. I'd lift a hammer, forget what I was supposed to be doing. The foreman told me to take time off if I needed, but I refused. Working was the only thing that kept me from thinking too hard. I poured my energy into carrying lumber, mixing cement, installing drywall, anything that took focus. But when I got home, the emptiness hit again. The kids tried to pretend everything was normal, but I saw in their eyes they knew it wasn't. Sometimes I heard the older one in his room, crying softly. I never went in. Couldn't. When the day came to get the results, I drove to the lab alone. She texted me that she'd meet me there, but I told her I didn't want to see her. I walked in, gave my name, and waited in a stiff plastic chair. My leg was bouncing, heart racing. The receptionist smiled politely, handed me a paper, said, "Everything's in the envelope." I stared at that envelope for a solid minute, not ready to open it. Finally, I stepped out to my truck, shut the door, and tore it open. I read each line. The oldest was mine, 99.9% match. The middle was not. Probability of paternity less than 1%. The youngest was also not. Another line of text. Exclusion. My eyes blurred. I read them again, as if the words might change. But they didn't. So it was confirmed. My middle kid was fathered by her ex, the one who visited once a year. And the youngest? The DNA pointed straight to Johnny. I must have sat in my truck for an hour, maybe more. My hands and feet went numb, and I kept thinking, this can't be real. But it was. Scenes of the past years flooded back. Family holidays, birthdays, sports events, little moments I'd cherished. They felt tainted, like everything was a setup. A trick. And at the same time, I knew those kids were just kids. They didn't ask to be born. They didn't choose any of this. My anger was at her, at Johnny, at the ex, at life. But the pain I felt was like someone scooped out my insides and left a hollow shell. I don't remember driving home. I must have stopped at a gas station because the truck was half full when I pulled into the driveway. The kids' bikes lay on the lawn. A ball was wedged in the corner of the porch. Everything looked so ordinary, but nothing was. I got out, stood there in the yard, feeling the breeze on my face. My oldest spotted me from the window and waved. I managed to wave back. Then I walked inside, shut myself in the den, and didn't come out until the next day. That night I didn't cry. I thought I would. I'd never felt pain that deep. But all I had was emptiness. I felt more like a ghost than a man. Just sort of drifting through my own house, hearing the kids laugh or argue about something, hearing the dog scratch at the door. The phone buzzed with texts from her, probably asking if I'd picked up the results. I ignored them. I slid down onto the floor at one point, leaning against the wall, my eyes fixed on a spider crawling across the ceiling. I remember thinking how small and simple that spider's life must be. No betrayal, no heartbreak. Just instinct and survival. By morning, I decided I wouldn't show the kids the test results. Not yet. They were children, and no matter who their biological father was, I'd been the one raising them, at least in name. But I had to confront her eventually. I texted her. Got the results. Everything's clear. Don't ever lie to me again. She texted back. I'm sorry. That was all. I spent the next few days in a daze, going to work, coming home, making the kids dinner, then sitting in the basement. We had boxes of old photos down there, vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings. I pulled them all out. Must have been hundreds, scattered across the floor. I saw pictures of me holding the kids when they were babies, pictures of us smiling at baseball games, me and her hugging in front of the Grand Canyon. Each photo felt like a punch to the gut. Because now I knew the truth behind the smiles. The secrets that had been lurking in plain sight. Some nights, I just sat there in the dark, flipping through those snapshots, wondering if any of it had been real. Maybe parts of it were. Maybe she loved me once. Maybe the kids had real moments of happiness that weren't faked. But it didn't matter. The foundation was cracked. And once you see that crack, you can't pretend it's solid anymore. I didn't drink much, just a beer here or there. I didn't go out with friends. Didn't talk to my relatives. I existed. The kids tried to keep their routines. School, homework, TV. They asked where Mom was, and I told them she needed time away. They didn't push too hard. Maybe they sensed I was at the end of my rope. Finally, one evening, I stood up in the basement, looked at the mess of photos, drawings, letters. And I decided. I gathered them all up, every memory I had, every piece of paper that reminded me of how things used to be. I put them in a cardboard box. Then I grabbed a black marker and wrote something on the side. Family. A bitter joke to myself, I guess. I sealed the box, took it upstairs, left it by the back door, and stared at it for a while. My heart hammered, and my palms were sweaty, but I didn't let myself hesitate. I was going to give them to the one person who might need to see them more than me. It was late in the afternoon when I drove to Johnny's place. The sky was clear, with the sun setting behind the row of houses. It cast long shadows over the asphalt, and I saw the remains of black skid marks from where he'd probably towed the Mustang away. I parked my truck and looked at the front door. My chest felt tight. I knew his wife was still there. She hadn't left him, or so I'd heard from a neighbor. Maybe she didn't know what had really happened. Maybe she had her own suspicions. Either way, she was about to learn more than she ever wanted to. I grabbed the cardboard box from the passenger seat. It was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe my arms felt weak. I walked up the driveway, my boots crunching on some loose gravel. The porch light wasn't on, but I could see a faint glow from inside the house. I took a breath and knocked. My knuckles sounded too loud in the quiet neighborhood. After a moment, the door opened. She stood there, blinking like she was surprised to see me. I realized I hadn't visited them in months. Used to be we'd see each other every week, have a beer on the porch, talk about random stuff. Now, we were strangers. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a haphazard ponytail. There was an awkward silence. Finally, she said, "Did you want to see Johnny?" Her voice had a slight tremor. I shook my head. "No," I said. Then I lifted the box slightly. "These are for you." She looked down at it, confused. "What is it?" she asked. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Pictures," I said. "Letters. Kids' drawings. All of it." She frowned, still not understanding. So I cleared my throat. "Your grandson is in these photos," I said, watching her face change. She looked at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. I saw a flash of realization, confusion, anger. It all flickered in her eyes. "Grandson?" she repeated. Her voice was shaky, but there was a sharpness to it. I nodded, set the box down on the threshold. "Yeah. The youngest. He's Johnny's." My words fell flat and heavy in the evening air. She stared at me, her hand gripping the doorknob so tightly her knuckles turned white. For a moment, it looked like she might scream, or slam the door in my face. But she didn't. She just went pale and pressed her other hand to her mouth. I didn't give her details. Didn't explain how we found out, or that there were more lies with my wife's ex. I didn't owe her the story. I just needed to unload those memories. Let her see the kid she never knew was connected to her. Let her decide what to do with that truth. "You can show Johnny," I said. "Or don't. I don't care. But these belong to you now." She was breathing hard, tears threatening to spill, but she fought them back. Her gaze flicked to the box, then back to me. "How could—" she started, but didn't finish. I knew what she was trying to say. How could this happen? How could Johnny do this? How could life get so twisted? I didn't have an answer. I just shrugged, my voice low. "I'm done," I said. "I can't hold on to this stuff anymore." She nodded slowly, like she understood on some level. I stepped back from the door, my shoulders sagging. I felt a weird mix of triumph and sadness. I'd wanted to hand him the box in person, see his expression. But part of me was glad I didn't. The damage was done. Let him face the fallout from his own wife, on his own time. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about cutting ties. So I turned and walked away. She didn't call after me, didn't throw the box back at me. She just stood there silent. Back in my truck, my hands shook on the steering wheel. I stared at the house for a moment, expecting maybe to see him come out. But he didn't. So I started the engine and drove off, leaving behind the pictures, the drawings, the scraps of a life I once thought was real. That was the last time I saw Johnny's wife up close. The next week, I heard rumors they might sell the house. I didn't care. Let them do what they want. When I got home, I found the place dark and quiet. The kids were with friends or maybe out at practice. The dog lay by the door, tail thumping a little when I walked in. I flicked on a lamp, noticing the stark emptiness of the rooms. No sign of her, no sign of the life we once had. Just furniture and shadows. For a moment, I thought about grabbing a beer from the fridge. But I was tired of the taste. Tired of everything. I wandered to the den, sat on the old couch, and closed my eyes. Images flickered behind my eyelids. The day I smashed his Mustang, the lab results, handing that box to his wife. Somewhere along the line, I'd lost the man I used to be. Or maybe I'd never been that man. Maybe I was living a lie from the start. I felt hollow, like a part of me had rotted away. The next morning, I drove to work as usual. Stayed late, hammering nails, hauling materials, ignoring my coworkers' looks. They wanted to ask what was wrong but didn't know how. I didn't volunteer anything. After all the lying and secrets, I didn't have the energy to share. So I kept my head down and worked until my muscles burned. When I finally got home, it was dusk again. The kids were eating pizza, boxes spread on the kitchen table. I joined them, said nothing. They made small talk about school, about sports. I grunted in reply. I saw the older one glance at me like he was gauging my mood, but he didn't push. We each had our protective walls by then. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I sat in the driveway, staring up at the sky. The stars were faint behind the glow of the streetlights. A train horn sounded in the distance. My thoughts drifted to the future. What was I supposed to do now? My marriage was done. 2 of the kids weren't biologically mine. Did that mean I turned my back on them? No. They were still in my care, still needed me for now. But they'd grow up. Maybe they'd drift away, or maybe they'd resent me for pushing their mother out. The older boy seemed to understand something, though we never talked about it. I had too much pride, or maybe too much pain. I thought about my father, a hard man who raised me with strict rules. He never spoke about feelings, never showed vulnerability. I used to think he was too cold. Now I wondered if he was just a man who'd been through his own storms and had no words left. Maybe this is how men become empty, through betrayal, through heartbreak, until there's nothing to say. I sat there until the cool night air made me shiver. Then I went inside to the den. Couldn't bear to step foot in the master bedroom. I lay down on the couch, stared at the ceiling, and tried not to think of anything at all. The next few days blurred together. She texted me once, asking how the kids were, if they needed anything. I replied with a single word. Fine. She tried to call, but I let it ring. I was done talking. My lawyer, some guy I found through a friend, said I should think about child custody arrangements, but I didn't have the strength to push for anything. I told him to draft papers. I'd sign them. Let her figure out where she wanted to be. The kids were old enough to know which parent they preferred anyway. I kept waiting for Johnny to show up, to yell at me for telling his wife, or to start a fight. But he never did. Maybe he was too ashamed, or too cowardly. Maybe it was easier for him to hide in his own house until he moved away. Fine by me. I wasn't looking for another confrontation. The rage in me had drained out, replaced by a heavy emptiness that felt worse. Sometimes I wished I could go back to that moment, and just run away from the bedroom door, never see what I saw. But you can't undo reality. One evening, the neighbor on the other side stopped by, asked if everything was all right. He'd heard some rumors. I just shrugged and said, "Yeah, I'm okay." And he left it at that. Word travels in a small community, but folks also like to keep out of each other's messes. I appreciated that. I didn't need pity or meddling. By the time another week passed, I knew I couldn't stay in that house. The memories were suffocating me. The kids were planning on college or moving out soon enough. The oldest was half out the door already, picking up extra shifts at work to save money. So I made a decision. I started looking for a cheap trailer out in the outskirts of town, something simple, just enough for me to have a bed and a place to breathe. I found one in a scrappy little park near a highway exit, not too far from a convenience store. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. I paid the deposit and started moving my essentials, tools, clothes, a TV. No photos. I didn't have any left anyway. The day I finally left the house for good, the sky was overcast, threatening another storm. I loaded the last boxes into my truck, shut the door, and looked at the place that had once been a home. The windows stared back like empty eyes. I didn't feel sad. Just numb. The kids were all out, school, work, or somewhere else, so there were no goodbyes. I left a note on the kitchen table. Call me if you need anything. I'm not far. I locked the door, put the key in an envelope for the real estate agent I'd hired, and drove away. At the trailer park, I found my new place at the end of a row of battered mobile homes. Paint peeling, a broken fence, a couple of old cars on blocks. But there were also some folks who kept things tidy, flower pots, wind chimes. I parked in front of my assigned lot, stepped inside, and took a long look around. The trailer was small, smelled like stale air, but it had a bed, a kitchen area, and enough room for a couch. That was all I needed. I dropped my boxes on the floor, cracked open a window, and let the breeze flow in. The next few weeks settled into a lonely pattern. I'd wake up before dawn, drive to work, put in my hours, come back, heat a can of soup or microwave some dinner, then sit on a folding chair outside, looking at the highway in the distance. Sometimes a neighbor would wave, but I kept to myself. I guess I still had that shell of emptiness around me. No desire to explain anything to anybody. My oldest son came by once, about 2 weeks after I moved in. He pulled up in his beat-up sedan, stepped out looking nervous. I greeted him with a nod. We stood there in the gravel, not sure what to say. Finally, he handed me a bag of groceries, milk, bread, some cereal. I nodded thanks. He said, "You doing okay?" And I just shrugged. We both knew the answer. But I tried to give him something, so I said, "I'm getting by." He glanced at the trailer. "This is where you live now?" he asked. I said, "Yeah. It's not fancy, but it works." We went inside, and I offered him a soda from the mini fridge. He sat on the couch, fiddling with the cans tab. I saw the questions in his eyes, about Mom, about the affairs. But he didn't ask, and I didn't volunteer. Instead, we talked about his job, how he was saving up for community college, how the younger kids were doing. We tiptoed around the big issues like they weren't there. After an hour, he left. I stood at the window and watched him drive off, feeling a pang of guilt that I couldn't connect with him more. But I was still locked inside my own pain. Days turned into weeks. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she was staying with Johnny in some apartment, or maybe she'd moved on already. People whispered that Johnny's wife had kicked him out. Others said they were trying to work it out. I didn't care enough to find out. Every so often, my phone rang with an unknown number, and I let it go to voicemail. If it was her, I didn't want to know what she had to say. The kids had my new address and phone. That was all I needed. Meanwhile, the emptiness inside me changed shape. It wasn't the burning rage I'd felt that first day, or the shock of the paternity tests. It was a dull ache, like an old injury that never fully heals. At work, I managed to keep my head down and get tasks done. My boss gave me a nod sometimes, as if to say, "Good job, keep it up." I didn't talk much to the guys. When they invited me for a beer or a barbecue, I politely declined. I just wasn't ready to pretend life was normal. One evening, after a grueling shift, I stopped by the convenience store near the trailer park. The fluorescent lights hummed, and the aisles smelled like cheap coffee and cleaning solution. I grabbed a frozen dinner, some jerky, and a bottle of water. At the counter, the clerk gave me a friendly greeting. I mumbled a response. Then I caught my reflection in the security mirror overhead. I saw a man with tired eyes, stubble on his chin, shoulders slumped. He didn't look particularly old or young. Just worn. And I realized that was me now. Not angry, not grieving. Just empty. Back at the trailer, I heated the dinner, wolfed it down without tasting it, then sat outside on my rickety folding chair. The sky was clear, and I could see stars. A gentle wind rustled the dry grass around me. In the distance, the headlights of cars on the highway flickered. I closed my eyes, and all I could think about was that day in the bedroom, her, Johnny, the sheets. It came uninvited, like a knife twisting in my gut. Then I remembered the paternity tests, the looks on the kids' faces. Some nights, it played in my head on a loop. A life I thought was solid turned out to be a house of cards. I started going for drives late at night, just me and the empty roads. Sometimes I'd roll the windows down, let the cool air wash over me, and try to feel something: anger, sadness, regret, anything. But mostly, it was numbness. I'd circle around town, pass by the old house, see the lights off. I wouldn't stop. Eventually, I'd circle back to the trailer, crawl into bed, stare at the ceiling until I drifted off. Time passed. The older boy visited now and then. The middle and the youngest didn't come. Maybe they blamed me, or maybe they just followed her lead. I wouldn't force them. They had their own lives, their own confusions. I still worried about them, but I wasn't going to chase after them. I figured they'd come around if they wanted. Or maybe they wouldn't. That was the price of everything that happened. As for me, I learned to exist in a smaller world. Wake up, work, eat alone, sleep. No big dreams, no big plans. I'd save what little money I could, maybe fix the trailer up someday, patch the roof, paint the walls. But inside I knew all that was just passing the time. Each day, I'd wake up with the image of her and Johnny flashing in my mind, as if it were branded there. I'd wonder if there was a moment when she could have told me the truth, or if there was a moment I could have walked away sooner. But that's just spinning wheels. The past is fixed, and it swallows you if you let it. One afternoon, out of the blue, my boss told me I had a visitor. I walked over, and there was my oldest son, scuffing his shoe on the gravel. He held a small envelope. I asked what it was. He said, "It's just my graduation announcement, Dad. It's happening next month. If you can make it." My chest tightened. I nodded, taking the envelope. "I'll be there," I said quietly. He gave me a tiny smile, then glanced around at the construction site, maybe curious about how I spent my days. I felt a surge of something: pride, regret, love, all tangled up. But I didn't show it. Just gave him a half smile and said, "Thanks for letting me know." He nodded, awkward, then he left. When I got home that day, I stuck the announcement on my tiny fridge with a magnet. It felt strange to see a piece of my son's life displayed in my rundown trailer. But it also felt right, like a small reminder that I wasn't completely alone. Even if everything else was gone, I still had that thread connecting me to him. And so, I keep living. One day at a time. I go to sleep, wake up, do the work. Sometimes I manage to forget the pain for a few hours, especially when I'm busy or when I'm talking to my oldest. Other times, it hits me out of nowhere, and I have to catch my breath. But I'm not angry anymore. I'm just hollow. That's the truth of it. I don't regret what I did, the smashing of the Mustang, giving the box of photos to his wife. I don't feel guilt either. It was what it was. Now it's done. If you asked me what I'd change if I could go back, I don't know. Maybe I'd wish none of it happened. But then I look at my oldest son and think, I wouldn't trade him for anything. Even if the rest was a lie, he's real. He's mine. Some mornings, I open my eyes and the first thing I see is the cracked ceiling of this trailer. For a split second, I'm back in that old house, half expecting to hear the kids running around or smell coffee brewing in the kitchen. Then I remember. It's like a jolt, but quieter now. I get up, splash water on my face, and face another day. Maybe that's all there is. Just living with the hole inside you. And that day I stepped into my bedroom and saw them. That's the dividing line. Before it, I was one man. After it, I'm another. And I can't ever go back to who I was. So here I am. 52, living in a rundown trailer, with only one kid who visits sometimes, and a head full of memories I'd rather not replay. I'm not proud of myself, not ashamed either. Just existing. Every morning, I think about that moment in the doorway, and it feels like the real start of my life. Everything before it seems distant, like a story somebody else told me. This is my truth now. I guess that's all there is to say.